All right, we should be live, folks. So welcome to today's Department of Behavioral Health live stream event we're having. We're going to be having a conversation today with, I need to mute my phone, sorry guys. Discussing with three gentlemen, two who are veterans and Chaplain Alan, who we'll come to in a second, who is still currently serving. To discuss some ways that we can help support veterans as well as their family. I will give everyone we'll go through and do a quick bio so you guys will get a sense for who are our panelists today that are going to be speaking, kind of their perspective. We wanted to do this obviously last week with Veterans Day being last week, but on Veterans Day, most people are going to be at the parade here in Fresno. So that wasn't probably going to be a great option. The day after, a lot of folks had turned that into a 4-day weekend, so that was probably not a great option. So we are doing it a couple of days after Veterans Day, but we feel that this is a topic and discussion that we can have any time of year. Our veterans and family members are veterans and family members 365 days a year, not just once a year. So the discussion will definitely be relevant. And one of the things I really want to set the stage for folks that are watching or listening to this is we're here having a discussion on how we can better support our veterans. I want to make it very clear that we're in no way saying that there's anything wrong with our veterans, that they're having any kind of an issue or that the problem is with them. I think there's sometimes, there can be folks on TV and so-called mental health experts that, tend to refer to our veterans in a way that can be stigmatizing. And understanding that, veterans are human beings, and as human beings, we experience life differently. And sometimes we have, and I think, Derek, you're going to touch on this later, but sometimes we have maybe a way that we can, work through that particular issue. And sometimes we may struggle in terms of how do we address that issue. So I really want to make sure that we approach this today. And for those of you guys listening, know that we're going to approach this from really a way of how do we uplift our veterans and their families, and really how do we come from a strength-based approach to help our just fellow community members, and that there's nothing wrong with them. Some of them have just experienced, whether during their term of service or before that, abnormal experiences. And so they've just tried to navigate through that. So I think that's really, really important to do, because I think too often, I'll give you guys a quick segue. We did some coverage last week. Derek and I were interviewed by a local TV station to share about some of the work and just resources and things that we could do to help veterans. And I really appreciated the work of that particular reporter. I was at a different station, reached out to us and said, hey, we want to see if you can talk to us on Veterans Day about veterans and PTSD. And I was just like, no. I was like, because the way the approach of that story was going to be was to stigmatize, implying that all veterans have an issue and all veterans have, and I was just like, no, you're causing more harm when we're trying to really overcome stigma within our veterans community and their families, saying there's nothing wrong with you. You've just experienced something that was abnormal. You're not abnormal. We're here to help you. And when you're going to put that kind of lens on it, I just felt that they were going to stigmatize, our community. And I was just like, no, I'm not going to do that interview. So with that said, enough grandstanding. I'm excited that you guys are here. I'm excited that people are going to be able to tune in. Lisa from our team is going to post some information in the chat, more detailed bios of our three panelists today. But I'll start off with Mr. Jeremy DeVault right here. Jeremy currently works as a state disabilities veteran representative with the California Department of, well, I guess it's the other way. The Employment Development Department. I tend to put department first at the beginning, but with what you guys know as the EDD. Jeremy served 6 years in the United States Army. He had multiple deployments to Iraq. After receiving his honorable discharge, he went ahead and re-upped and worked as a contractor doing security work and other operations within Iraq, leading a team for several more years. He is classified as a disabled veteran, but he is now working to help other veterans in navigating just kind of that. Would you say that transition from veteran back into the civilian side of things? And so we'll put a little more info on Jeremy's bio in the chat. The next person I want to introduce to our panel is Chaplain Raynard Allen. Also can be known as Dr. Allen, can also be known as Commander Allen, but he kindly said that today I can refer to him as Chaplain Allen to keep it simple for me. So thank you for that. Chaplain Allen has an extensive history in working with as a chaplain, both as well as your education. I was looking through here and I was going to list off all of those, Chaplain Allen, but I was like, there's quite a number of them. He's an ordained minister. He has served 18 years as a pastor. He has worked in multiple states and congregations. He earned a doctorate of ministry from Regent University. You've specialized in suicide prevention amongst the Marine Corps, also graduated from the Marine Corps University with an emphasis on joint professional military education. Chaplain Allen has served throughout various locations in the United States, overseas, aboard various ships. There's a full page of all his accolades and accomplishments in service. And so those are just a few things. I don't want to leave anything out. So I will have Lisa post that as well in the chat. But thank you for being here today, Chaplain Allen. And then lastly, sorry, go ahead.
I said my pleasure.
Oh, okay. Because I feel like I'm shortchanging all of you guys with your bios, but I don't want to spend the first 20 minutes on the bios, but you guys have great accolades and have done a lot of work in service. So I'm trying to kind of balance both those. And our last panelist is Derek Brown. Derek Brown works for the VA, Veterans Administration in the social work department. He is also a United States Army veteran who served 6 years, including deployments to Operation Iraqi Freedom. Derek is now a licensed clinical social worker. He has 15 years working in various human service agencies, working with individuals. I'm trying to see what are some of the key things I can pull out there. Let me see. Derek also has a family, and I think most of you gentlemen have mentioned you guys also have families. So in addition to being veterans professionals, you're also all family men, which also probably includes, I think, Jeremy, do you have children as well?
Yes, sir. I got 3 daughters.
Okay, girl dad right here like me. So, and all of you have children. So we all know that that's a whole nother unique and challenging life role in itself, parenting. And so even though I was off for a couple of days, I felt exhausted, and I feel today like more rested here at work than I did those several days at home with my little girl. So parenting is in itself a whole unique challenge that we all also take on. So with that said, I'm going to dive into our discussion for our audience to know, we have some kind of questions to get the dialogue going, but we're going to be relying really on just a natural flow of the conversation with our 3 guests today, and just kind of see where the conversation goes. So to start it off, I'm going to pose a question to anyone on the panel, and if all 3 of you want to chime in, that I think would be excellent. And the question is, why is this so important? We're talking about working with veterans, but I think today's panel discussion, we also wanted to highlight the importance that families are in terms of for our veterans, and why it's important for us to also remember the families when we're talking about supporting our veterans. So why do you think it's important to work with a family, not just the veteran themselves? And anyone can start that off if they want.
Yeah, it's important to work with the family due to the fact that the family needs to understand what is maybe occurring with the veteran at certain times, and maybe the approach they need to take or the approach they do not need to take when dealing with certain situations. I'm sure Chaplain and Derek have a lot more to input on this.
I would like to add.
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Chaplain.
I was going to just add to what Jeremy has stated, that the family is the nucleus of that service member's life. They are the most important person, should be in that person's life. When all is said and done, we walk away from the military, who do we have left? Our families. And so they are the most important to them. So that's why they need to be included. They need to be a part of the discussion, a part of the life of that individual.
Absolutely. I echo everything that the other panelists just said, is that from a family systems perspective, it's important to understand that every single family member within a unit is providing input into each other, meaning in order for each individual to maintain that balance in life, they really need to have, a lot of protective factors around them. And a lot of times, our family members themselves are those protective factors. And if our family members are not supported properly and then they burn out or have compassion fatigue, then it's going to be extremely difficult for us as professionals to use them as allies in that veteran's care. And so it's extremely important that we support the family members as well.
You used the term compassion fatigue, and I'm sure a lot of the professionals that might be watching may be familiar with that term, but for just the layperson that maybe is not familiar with that term, can you kind of just expand or give an example of what you mean by compassion fatigue for the families, just so that people understand what, just the context of it?
Sure, no problem. So it's very common for not just like us as behavioral health professionals, or even anyone working with people in general, or caregivers. So family members actually end up becoming caregivers for those veterans who may be having some difficulties. And like you stated earlier, Ahmad, every single veteran is not having issues per se, but when working with people, it's you can develop what compassion fatigue is basically, overexerting yourself trying to help someone recover. But then that person may be at sort of like the pre-contemplation state of change, right? So they're not ready. They don't really have their way out, and they don't know the way how to change in that moment. And so it can be very burdensome on the caregiver. And so compassion fatigue is overexerting ourselves trying to pull someone else up. And so that's why I'm saying it's extremely important in those situations that, we have more support wrapping around that individual to help them come out, because if not, both people will go down. And, we've seen that a lot. Like I remember when I was a kid, you see that in the animal kingdom. I remember I had a pet bird that actually, passed away. And it wasn't not too long after that, the husband passed away. Well, I'm calling it the husband. I was a kid and I thought they were married. It's like one of those things. And we know that, human beings, we thrive off of connection and community. And so, that compassion fatigue, it makes a lot of sense that, like, if you don't have your partner who you're very intimate with, whole, so to speak, then it presents a lot of challenges.
Absolutely. And we see, and I wanted you to kind of touch on that, and I appreciate you providing that clarification, Derek, because, there's a lot of courage that can experience compassion fatigue, but we definitely know, for example, with Chaplain Allen and folks in the faith communities, there's a lot of times that compassion fatigue, and you're trying to take care of your congregation, you're trying to be that voice, and you're hearing their troubles, and you're trying to advise, but then after a while, you start to kind of get exhausted and be like, who do I, kind of dump this on? We see that with social workers. We see that with, paramedics. We see that with teachers, to where you're helping people, like you said, Eric, being that caregiver. But at some point, it's like you can only give so much of yourself, right, before needing to kind of restore yourself to, and then making sure that that you get whole. And I think you made that really important distinction for families that are supporting a fellow family member. That in this case we're talking about a veteran, but it could be anyone else that they also get tired too. And I see Derek put in our chat, helpers need helpers too. So that's why I wanted you to kind of clarify that, the compassion fatigue, so people really understood that, this is a thing to where, as a family member, you can kind of, I don't say get burned out, but you can kind of get exhausted too, and saying like, okay, well, where's my help, right? And who do I turn to? And as for families, it might be, someone in their faith community, that they may go to and turn to. But if I'm able to go to Chaplain Allen here and have him help me with my compassion fatigue, that's great for me. The challenge is going to be, at some point, we got to make sure that Chaplain Allen's got someone that he can go to and go like, all right, you gotta nourish me, because I'm giving all I got here. So and understanding, for the veterans families, there's those challenges too. You guys mentioned, or we had mentioned at the beginning, just that, and clarifying, we're not saying that there's anything wrong with members of our veterans community. They've just experienced sometimes adverse experience, and we'll get into even some of that may have been experience that you had long before being in the service. But what are the things that because people are responding to, what are the things that we can do as professionals when we're supporting our veterans so that we approach them in a way of helping, and not that there's anything wrong with them, but just understanding that. So me coming to Jeremy is not that there's anything wrong with Jeremy, but Jeremy has experienced something that is now impacting him. So how do I approach Jeremy without a way of going like, Jeremy, there's something wrong with you, let me help you? Because then that could be off-putting. Like, dude, like, no, there's nothing. Like, if you walked in my shoes, you'd be doing the same thing too, right? It's kind of that thing. So how do we, I don't want to say flip it, but help people understand, like, this is the way you help me without making me feel bad about what I'm experiencing. Do any of you have some suggestions for us out there?
I can maybe make a suggestion on a great doctor that I had that really rejuvenated myself. His name was Dr. Nelson, and unfortunately he passed away in 2020. But the main thing that he would make me do and felt other than other doctors was he would start out by saying, if I had an issue or I had trouble composing myself, he said, well, how can you not have an issue with composing yourself? Look what you've been through. It's normal. It's okay to be that. But let's try to change that aspect. You do see that you need to do it. But I want you to experience and understand that it's normal, the reactions you're having. You defended your life every day, and it's hard to take that defense out of it. So I think that he more changed the aspect of it being a problem and making me feel more normal than anything.
Yeah, I'm
Derek.
sorry.
I'll follow you.
I think you read my notes there, Jeremy. I definitely said we have to validate, the veterans' experience, because at the end of the day, we come from very different backgrounds and things like that. And so a lot of times we can have a perception of ourselves based on certain behaviors and things that we might be doing. And we beat ourselves up a lot as veterans. As a veteran myself, and as a professional now, I'm so hard on myself. I think it's ingrained in us to be hard on ourselves. And then to have someone say that's normal, it gives you an opportunity to kind of let go of all that and really, continue to, you mentioned earlier, like a strengths-based perspective. I think a lot of times it's easy, as a veteran, to focus on your weaknesses and not your strengths. And so just having someone, really validate you that it's normal really opens you up to have that honest dialogue, and it creates an environment of trust. I think that's really helpful in terms of someone, overcoming any challenges they might have. So that was a great point, Jeremy.
And I want to add to that. And one person has said that people really don't care. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. We have to be there with individuals, showing that we care, showing that we're compassionate, and that we're not there to judge them, and that they're in a safe environment, and they're not walking on eggshells when they come around us. We're making them feel that they are in a safe place to share whatever's on their heart and mind. And that atmosphere or that culture is developed by spending quality time with them, by letting them know that, hey, you're human too. You have struggles in life, and you're not up here and you're down here, but we're all in this together, and we all are pulling the same direction. So I'm here to help you. There'll be some times you can support me in some challenges that I'm having in my life. So I think in that way that we're setting ourselves up in a way that they feel comfortable and being open to us and disclosing what's on their heart and mind.
Absolutely. So along those lines, I got a question for Chaplain Allen, and anyone else can chime in, but I wanted to kind of get your take on this, Chaplain Allen, and I think it kind of builds on what we were talking about. So do you think if we talk about some of our veterans, the trauma that they've experienced more in terms of the word moral injury versus trauma would be a more effective way of engaging? And for people that may not be familiar with like the term moral injury, is that if you grew up going to church or whatever religious belief that you have, you're taught some basic kind of core values, right? And one of those is thou shalt not kill, and thou shalt not, do this, and we shouldn't do those certain things we're not supposed to do. And yet, if you're in the heat of the battle and you're in war, there's things that you have to do as part of your job, right? That normally you wouldn't do. And so how do you kind of reconcile those things for us to where, like, if you're like, hey, I'm a good person, I'm a God-fearing person, and I know these are things that you're not supposed to do, but yet this particular job I was in for, whatever, 6 years, 10 years, whatever, said I needed to do these things. And because, we'll get into that part in there, but I guess my question for you, Chaplain Allen, is, do you think it makes it easier for us to have that conversation, or maybe our veterans to have conversations with us and their families, if we really view what has happened, or maybe what they've experienced as a moral injury versus like trauma? Because does the word trauma have too much kind of like baggage or negative connotation with it?
I think it's very helpful. And I want to say therapeutic. I'm using that word very carefully because I know we have some in our circle here. But from a spiritual point of view, I think it's very helpful to put those things on the table, to talk about moral injury. What I did in Iraq, and that I know that it was not something I can't sleep at night because I did something that I know I shouldn't have done, or I did something that I had to do. And that bothers me. I know before a lot of our Marines stepped out to Iraq, they brought their rifles to me, the M16s, and says, hey, Chaplain Allen, would you please pray over my M16? And they had a name for each of their M16s. And, they realized that going over there that they will be pulling the trigger and taking someone's life. It may be a life of a child or someone who may be innocent standbys, just accidentally got shot. So they're dealing with that. So I think it's very, very fruitful, very helpful to sit down with that individual, to sit down with that family, and talk with them about what they experienced overseas. As I've done so, and I've allowed that sailor, that Marine, to share, to vent, and to get what was on their heart off their chest. And it was very therapeutic, very helpful. That is.
Yeah, and I agree, Chaplain. I think that, framing it from a moral injury perspective allows for there to be context, if you will, and words to their trauma. So I don't think it replaces trauma. I think it aids because when you think of trauma is something that happens as a result of physiological responses to something that an individual sensed or a veteran sensed on the outside. Something happened and created this sort of internal narrative that sometimes is challenging to be able to really tell the story. There's bits and pieces of the story. And I think moral injury provides a framework to say, okay, let's look back over your life and look at your values and beliefs. And is there some guilt in there? I think I agree with you that it definitely is a tool that can definitely be used. And that's what I think one of my questions is going to be about, the wellness model. And I think that's why, we work so much better together. I know at the VA, I work side by side with our chaplain there on different projects. And they have a program there called Combat Reboot Recovery. And in that class, it talks about moral injury. And, when someone has that clarity to be able to work through, maybe some of their experiences, it's really helpful to have that conversation about moral injury to overcome those traumatic experiences. So that way, and then when you look at like CBT, you can use those, the things that you've learned about moral injury to sort of combat maybe some of those negative thoughts that you might have about yourself. And so I think it's a very powerful tool, when in terms of, recovery.
Jeremy, anything you want to add to that one? Or?
Yeah, I would just say, dealing with things myself and other veterans that I understand and know very well, you're going to go through things. And sometimes, when you're overseas, you're going to have to meet fire with fire. There's no other way around it. And unfortunately, that's what happens, being as the American culture going over into another country. We try to be the most moral and professional individuals on the earth, right? We say so anyways, right? But eventually, mission after mission, trauma after trauma, it does build some sort of a hate inside of you. Maybe they took your friend, maybe you know, you're something's going on back at home, and if you weren't there, you wouldn't be dealing with it. So it does change eventually your thought process, and I believe it changes it. I wouldn't say for the good, but it changes it to survival, right? Mm-hmm. And when you come home, you know, those nightmares and things like that are your subconscious telling you, and it's going to keep reminding you until you put it out on the table and you let it go. And it's very important to speak to the veterans to build the trust so they're able to pour that out on the table. I know I went through doctor after doctor, and it's no negative thing on the doctor. It just didn't work for me. And a lot of my friends went through the same process. And, you know, you just need to find someone where you're able to pour that out on the table, and eventually your subconscious will let it go. I think Chaplain and Derek hit it right on the hammer there.
And if I may add one thing, I think guilt is a big thing here. When veterans come back from war and they have been in a fight, many times they're trying to get revenge for a buddy that was shot and killed, and they're ready. I'm going to just pull the plug, pull the trigger on the first person I see, and that may be a child, maybe a woman. They may be a part of a rape, part of a gang rape during their attacks, and they come back. There's a sense of guilt, and now as a chaplain, I've got to work through that, the layers of that guilt, and help that family as well, help him to work through those issues and challenges.
I think Chaplain Allen, you touched on it, and or Derek, one of you guys touched on it, but under helping going back to the family, like importance of having the family understand kind of what this moral injury is, some of the things that Derek shared and Jeremy shared, and how, I guess, like the importance of that, and how would you kind of approach that with the family? Because you've got to make sure the person is, first of all, okay with us having that discussion, right? So Derek and I have got to be okay to where we're at least now having this open conversation before I can go like, all right, Derek, let's go talk to your people now about, you know, what happened. But in addition to that, I mean, what is the importance or the value, again, of being able to have the family understand when we're talking about moral injury more so than trauma? Because I think trauma, like you said, Derek, it's kind of this external, it's like something happened to them, versus when we think about moral injury, it's more of like something that's happened, you know, internally. Even though trauma, we know it's external, that impacts, like you said, the internal, but that moral injury is kind of with that person. So how do we maybe help the family really understand like what moral injury is and really how to support this person? Any thoughts on that?
I think we have to, once we get the buy-in from that particular service member, that it's okay to break confidentiality, to sit down with his family and let them know. I think Derek made a very good strong point, proactive factors, that they are a very important link to the healing of their family member, and how they can serve a very important role, not only in the healing, but also being patient and understanding that this is going to be a journey. It's going to be a journey, and we need to be patient with him as he goes through that, and explain to them what it is, what moral injury is all about. And once they understand, okay, this is what dad is going through, this is what my sister is going through. Okay, now I understand, and that helps them to be more support, a greater support, more understanding.
I have a question, Chaplain, since we're on this topic, because I think it's an important one that kind of, I think it comes out in my practice a lot, like especially when I was definitely working direct service with veterans at the VA, when they're angry at their higher power, or whomever they call that higher power, when they're angry at them, like how do you then, because we know that spirituality is definitely a component of their life, and the fact that they're angry shows that there is a need for that connection to that spirituality. How do you begin the conversation of, I guess, moral injury and reconciling that, so that way spirituality is a tool that we can also use in terms of their recovery and therapy, what would you recommend for something like that?
Well, we have to embrace their emotions, their anger, all of the emotions that they have. We have to embrace it. We have to accept it. We can't make them feel that they're weird or they're strange because they're having these feelings towards God. Lord, I'm angry with you. You have people in the Bible, even like Job and many others, who just took it out. So Lord, why am I going through this? Why am I suffering? Why am I having this mental anguish? Why am I having this physical anguish right now? And he was allowed to express himself. And so we as family members, as leaders here, social workers, pastors, our chaplains, we need to embrace the anger and let them express their feelings and let them feel God has created us with emotions. The Bible says Jesus wept. So he had emotions.
Right.
And so okay, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to weep, I don't advocate this other place where people are going now and they're really angry. They put them in a room and they start breaking up, whatever, but they work on I don't know what the program is called, but I heard about it recently where they get a bat and they start breaking up, things of that nature. But I'm saying we have to embrace that anger and don't think it's, don't get angry, don't be upset, but we have to embrace it. Mm.
Yeah. I like that. I think, I think, like you said, it is embracing it. And, I like how you also added that layer of, refer back to those stories to give them something to, something practical to do. Like, and when you're angry, I know it's one of the things that I say, is that when anger is high, cognition is low. So when you allow them to really vent all that frustration and they can get back to that place where they can think, they're more likely to go and read that story. And maybe there's a connection point there and maybe they can relate. And maybe that's a way for them to, kind of that validation that we talked about earlier. So I think I really appreciate that feedback.
Yeah. And I think important with the anger too, we have to put that in the right context as well. Not to the point where they're turning the anger physically towards a family member. That's a whole different discussion. Mm-hmm.
I think, Chaplain Allen, you made a really point of acknowledging that anger. And I think what you're talking about also is like creating a place where it's non-judgmental, because I think if someone is upset at their higher power, whatever that may be, that's not something that we kind of tell people it's okay. So then I think people got to feel safe to say, you know what, I'm upset, because it almost feels like you're going to be judged of like, who are you to be upset with God? Like how grandiose do you think you are? But if you've experienced that, you could be like, you know what, I'm upset because why would this happen? Why, what? And I think you made a really good point of acknowledging that anger. And I think what you're really talking about is creating that safe, non-judgmental space of saying like, it's okay. It's okay for you to be angry. That doesn't make you bad. That doesn't mean that your higher power is going to be mad at you because your anger has kind of a cause. And so by like you said, allowing them to have that conversation, just because it's like, why are you mad? And really getting into the nuance of it, like you said, and back to that moral injury, going like, okay, that is understandable. Let's talk about what's going on there then. So I think, you made a really good point in that. Jeremy, did you want to chime in on because I see you're...
Yeah, just real quick to support, everyone out there that does this type of work for veterans. It's real important to understand that the veteran must also be ready to accept these criticisms and accept the fact that these mistakes are being made, and accept the fact that he's going to have his family probably mentioning some things he never did mention. So if you guys ever get a veteran that storms out, does something, that probably wouldn't be done, just keep doing what you're doing. You guys will find the right vet, and the vet will find the right doctor. And you might be the right doctor, and he might come back to you. He just wasn't ready to accept and to change himself. It's all about accepting that you need some help, and you need to get through the things that you're dealing with. So keep doing what you're doing.
Jeremy,
thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'll say thank you for bringing that up, Jeremy, because I think that's the part where, the trauma aspect really comes in at, because the body really takes the score in terms of trauma. And so like a lot of times, we as veterans might be reacting to something, and we're just trying to get out of the the kill zone, so to speak, because there's something physiological going on in my body, and I've heard it called different things, and I've called it different things in my own body, like, a rushing river running through my veins, and we know what that means. And so it's like, I got to get out of there quickly. And so it is an actual strong physiological response that's happening with people that makes them feel out of control. And that's all they could think about in that moment. And so it's really about safety at that point. And it's really about, a lot of us, we go back to our training and yet that defense factor. Absolutely. And so, I just wanted to make sure that we're aware that, trauma is real. And, it's amazing how, when you look at the way the brain is structured, how, the limbic system sits right on the amygdala where our fight or flight response is. And the limbic system is the emotional house of the brain. And so I could be in a heated situation and a word could have triggered me, or a smell could have triggered me. And then all of a sudden, I don't even realize I was triggered. And so we have to, and Jeremy's making a great point. I got to get with the right, behavioral health professional or the right person to help me identify those triggers. And then I can feel empowered to have a little bit more control over the situation. So definitely, you guys definitely stick with it and understand that it's not you. Don't personalize it. It's a different road for some people. Even so, great point.
Jeremy, I got a question for you, and again, anyone can chime in, but this one I'm directing more towards Jeremy. So you kind of talked about, we're just talking about the family, and I think that was a perfect segue. So we talked a little bit about how and I want to be strength-based, so I'm going to say that, but the question may come off as more of a weakness, but that's not what it is. So the question is more like, how can or does a family relationship help or hinder a veterans, recovery? I think, Chaplain Allen and yourself and Derek have talked a little bit about the benefits of the family coming at it from a strength-based approach, where the family could hinder, not that family is bad, but understanding those family dynamics so that someone on our end that's trying to help the veteran understands, like, well, why would I not bring Jeremy's family into this? And so what could be some reasons why, the family may be a hindrance? Again, not that they're the problem, but could be a hindrance for that person's recovery at that time.
Great question, actually. The family dictates that answer, really. And the veteran, if he's understanding that they're not going to help, it's the veteran's choice to stay with that family or leave that family. Not everyone's for everybody, and not every caregiver is going to be able to withstand the storm coming. And that's not a weakness. And it might be a weakness, but veterans and caregivers need to understand what they can handle and what they cannot handle. And certain situations might pop up and dictate that answer, right? I mean, but if the veteran, the main thing with vets is I've noticed is that we were in a brotherhood. Unfortunately for me, I was with all men, and there was no women at that time in my infantry job. And so it was very hard for us to go back home. And now our main battle buddy, as you would say, is a woman. And it's hard to speak differently, and it's hard to react differently. You can sit there and yell at your friend that's a guy, but you cannot do that with your partner, right? They're going to take offense, and rightfully so. Let's say that, right? Rightfully so, they take offense because it's not the right reaction that they deserve either. But it's real important for caregivers or veterans to understand when a hindrance is happening and to how to react to it, or maybe leave the situation. And again, a lot of caregivers will feel guilt for leaving that veteran as well. But it is for their own mental health as well. And they need to work out some kinks that might be coming about. I'm sure the chaplain and Derek deal with this professionally. I'm just speaking from a veteran experience and a lot of friends that I have that have combat experience and even non-combat experience. There's things that occur, like, there's suicides that occur, and the veteran might have guilt over that. It doesn't have to be a combat experience, but all these type of rushes happen in training or in combat. They occur. And that's about all I have for that as experience. I think professionally, they're able to answer that a little better than I am.
Chaplain Allen or Derek, do you guys want to piggyback on what Jeremy shared? As far as how the family may at times be could be a hindrance if you don't approach it right, or if you're not familiar with the family dynamics.
Well, a lot of times it hinders on a lack of education, understanding of what the war was all about. Because there are some people who are just against war, who when the Vietnam soldiers, when we came back from Vietnam War, what was they called? What was they shouting out at us? Not, hey, congratulations. They weren't here. They were not heroes. They came back with other names. Okay, and their family and friends and the community and society shunned them. So at the same time, you're going to try to get them to be the community to embrace them. No, they did not. They were some baby killers, So at that time, at that moment in time, they didn't have the support. So that does create a vacuum whereby other resources will have to be implemented to help those who are coming back, the veterans.
Real quick, if I could say that I've experienced the hindrance and the assistance. I'm sorry, my baby's home and she's watching some TV or something. But
nowadays everybody understands that, Jeremy. So we've all had to do work from home. So you're good, dude.
Yeah.
I will say that one of the best blessings I ever felt was the hindrance leaving me, right, and forcing me to go out of my comfort zone. And being able to work on myself during that time to find the correct one. I mean, my wife is amazing. She's supportive. And there are times, of course, like every marriage, right? There's some things that pop up. But in all, something that might be the worst for a veteran might come out to be the best.
I really appreciate your honest and open feedback, Jeremy, because I think a lot of times you have younger veterans or even sometimes a little older veterans who have difficulties letting loose of those toxic, codependent, enabling relationships, right? And they get in these relationships with partners and just, they end up having, these intimate partner violence charges, they DUIs, all these negative risk factors. And maybe that's just not the person for you. It's not that you won't ever, get another partner. It's just all about being able to accept the reality of that loss. And I think that's challenging when you talk about, you mentioned that person being their battle buddy. And so, losing that battle buddy can be very challenging. And so that in and of itself has to be processed. You know what I mean? And so I think I really appreciate you just being honest about that, because so many of the veterans that I've worked with at the VA are, still holding on to things like, holding on to certain relationships and things like that. And it's just bringing them down. It really is bringing them down. And it's really when you can identify and say, this person just isn't for me, but there's someone else, and you can start that healing process. I think, some great things should happen for you. So.
Maybe something to add is the fact that when you're working with a veteran that's going, I'm sorry, Chaplain Allen, but if you're working with a veteran during that time, maybe it's important to remind the veteran of how disciplined and mentally strong that you developed and created for yourself, going through combat, coming back, maybe delivering the strengths the veteran has through one of the worst times that he might be experiencing. I know us as veterans and things like that, like Derek said, we're and I'm sure Mr. Allen, we're very hard on ourselves, and that's to the fact of being hammered for something just not being on your uniform correctly, right? But it's very important to help the veteran remember the discipline and the mental toughness and the strength that they do have to overcome anything.
That's right. Love it.
If I can, Well, I think to your point, Jeremy, I had a clinician that I used to work with, and we actually did a panel with him last year, veteran and clinician like Derek, who once kind of made the point to the veterans he used to work with that, again, building on the strengths from your military experience in the service, right? And kind of when he was trying to assist some of them, and they were kind of resistant and kind of like, no, I'll figure it out by myself. I don't need anyone. And he kind of asked some question. He goes, when in the military did you ever do anything on your own? And there was kind of this long pause. He goes, did you ever go out on patrol on your own? He goes, did you set up an ambush alone? Like, did you ever fly alone? Like, you never did anything alone in the military. And there was a reason why, the support, right? The benefit. And he goes, so why are you trying to do this by yourself and not let me help you? Like, why are you trying to do this one thing by yourself, but everything else you've done with support? And I think when he kind of raised that point to a couple of guys that they hadn't really thought about it that way, and they took a second and go like, yeah, all right, you got a point. All right, I'll hear what you got to say. So sometimes, like you said, Jim, I think it's we can build on the strengths of things that people have already experienced. Chaplain Allen, you had made the comment.
I think that's a great point, and it's interesting because as you were saying that, you made me relive my MEP station experience, and I was like, you know what? We didn't even raise our right hand by ourselves. Mm-hmm. You don't do anything by yourself once you even start the process. And so I think, it'd be interesting to kind of get the chaplain's take on the word surrender. I think that word surrender comes up a lot because it's like, you feel like, after leaving the military, and I don't know about you, Jeremy and Chaplain, but I had this mentality for some time that a civilian couldn't tell me anything. And I looked at civilians as inferior than me because of my training, because of my experiences. And so I wouldn't go to them for help for a long time. And I was so proud. And that was part of my reasoning. And so it was something that I had to learn, especially in the work that I do. I need allies, right? But how can you get allies if you think they're inferior than you? And so it's a mindset shift that you have to have. And I'm not saying everyone thinks like that. I'm just saying that's how I know I processed things for some time, and I had to surrender. And, it kind of reminds me of the movie 300. He was like, kneeling's going to be hard, but I mean, it's necessary though. So.
Yeah. And to all the veterans out there, the doctor that changed my life drastically was not a veteran. And I never knew that at first. I didn't even ask. So please be willing and open to accepting the help from someone that might not have those experiences, because he might be able to give you a view that you never thought of before.
And I found it to be so true. I have learned so much from my junior sailors and my junior Marines. Those who are E2s, E3s, they've shared some things with me that opened my eyes. And I'm reminded of a Bible text in the book of Proverbs, where the wise man says, in a multitude of counselors, there's wisdom. In a multitude of counselors, there's wisdom. So we do need a multitude around us. We need to support. We're not an island to ourselves. So the more people I can bring in, when I make a major decision, I want other people sitting around the table, and I want to be able to bounce those ideas off of them to make sure that, they look at other perspectives, not just my perspective, because a lot of times we have blinders on. We're not aware because we're just in our tunnel vision. But to be able to remove those blinders and have people around us on the left and right to pull from them, what do you think? It's like in a relationship, in a marriage. As I can go, but your wife, if she's very vocal, and she probably is, she's going to let you know you have blinders on. But leave it at that.
He's going to have to welcome us back for that one, Chaplain.
Chaplin's been around because he's speaking the truth right there. So, we got a question actually in one of the chats or in one of our social media platforms that I think tied in with a little bit of what you had initially touched on, Chaplain Allen, which was the question. The question is, how do we help elderly veterans, not just with care, but support groups, as well as more services for in-home care? So things like that. And you had mentioned, the Vietnam era veterans who had come back and what they had really experienced and really been shunned and rejected and not embraced us here was not thanked for their service. And those are a lot of the folks that are becoming our older veterans. And so, when you mentioned that and the question came in, I was just like, that might be a connection. So what are your guys' thoughts or suggestions or things that people out there can do to support our elder veterans? Again, not just with their care, but how can we, get resources and supports to them? How can we, make sure that again, as people maybe get older and it's harder for them to get around, how do we get, those supports and resources to them? At the Veterans Day Parade here in Fresno on Thursday, I don't know if you went, Jeremy, but when I took my girls out there, and there were a couple of folks that I was just enamored with, which were, they were surviving World War II veterans. And they had, identifications of World War II and their medals. And I was kind of like, wow, like that, that was just, really impressive, the folks. But at the same time, they were, definitely elderly. They were not able to get around real quickly. A lot of them had walkers and they had to be seated. So, I mean, I think our veterans, when we talk about veterans, we just don't have guys like Derek and Jeremy, who are our Iraq and Afghanistan war era veterans, but we do have some that are a lot older and have a lot more maybe challenge. So what are you guys' thoughts, all three of you, because you guys all do work with veterans and service personnel, things that we can do to help our older veterans?
I think number one, we have to engage them, right? I think we don't want to come up with solutions for people. We want people to feel empowered that as a community of elderly veterans, that they have a voice and they can speak to what their needs are. I think we make a fatal error when we try to design systems and programs to support people based on assumptions or based on anecdotal information that we might have from our family members, because every community doesn't necessarily have the same needs. Like our elderly in Fresno is different than elderly in, say, Mariposa County or Kings County or maybe some other rural areas where veterans may be. And so we really need to assess the needs of our community and ask them what their needs are. One of the things I know that we noticed at, the Fresno VA is that, a lot of the veterans there, the elderly veterans there, would hang out at the Starbucks there. And so anecdotally, you would say, hey, they need more social support, right? And as a social worker, that's my theory. And so what I want to do is I want to test that. I want to go out into the community and figure out, is this an issue where we need more social support and more places for them to gather, activities for them to do? Are the activities that are currently there, are veterans interested in those things? And so that's why, the veterans themselves need to say, this is what we want. We want this. And so I think going at it from that approach will ensure you have the most buy-in and the most participation.
Yeah, I would, anytime I get a Vietnam vet, I first thank them for their service, because if I came home and I got spit on, I don't know how I'd react. Probably not in the most professional way that they conducted themselves. So I first thank them for their service. And then I ask them any services or emergency services that they might need. Here we've created a collaboration between federal, state, and local. Let's say a lot of those guys, I've noticed they're real tough, and they are real tough. I wouldn't mess with any of them. But, a lot of times they're too tough to even, like Chaplain says, surrender to the VA help, surrender to their services now that they're able to get. And so what I've noticed that works for me is I don't send a veteran on the runaround. I collaborated, let's say, with Fresno County Service Office, the VA, and I'm well connected into all those systems to where I can have everybody come straight to the veteran. So now he finally feels the support coming to him. He doesn't have to run around, get wrong answers, or get sent away for different departments, causing probably more frustration. But yeah, Derek, I've noticed that too. Social services, they do hang out at the front of the VA, and that's their spot, So I would just say maybe, I always thank them for their service because they might not have got that.
Perfect.
That's a good point about thanking them for their service. I know that's something that my family and I we do in the community, and it's amazing how you spark up a conversation just by thanking someone for their service. Like I've always known, and because I've had uncles and family members who served, like if someone's wearing their service hat or something to identify that they're a service member, that means that they're proud of it. And so they want to be acknowledged, right? And so if no one acknowledges them throughout the day, then, how do they walk away from that feeling? But if you're the one person that day that said, thank you for your service and made them feel worthwhile, you look at that elderly age group, there's this developmental crisis that they're trying to resolve called generativity versus stagnation, which is like, generativity is, your purpose, meaning in life, and that your life meant something. But stagnation is like, well, my life wasn't really worth anything. And so to have someone in the community just come up and say, thank you for your service, and then open up a conversation about the Raider game, that's people, people in general like that interaction and communication. So, I just think that was a great point to remind folks to thank people for their service, not just on Veterans Day, but whenever you see them in the community, Walmart, Target, wherever you might see them, you'll be surprised the reactions you'll get.
I know we're running out of time. I just want to just share one quick point here as far as appreciation. Thank you, Jeremy, for bringing that out. I was sitting in a restaurant on Friday evening, and when I walked in, there were about 10 or 12 sheriffs sitting there, heavy, with their pistols and everything. And I sat there and then say, my own business, sat there, got my food, my back was to them. But on the back of my shirt, it says Marine Corps and it says Okinawa and places I've served. And they left the restaurant before I did. When I walked to the cashier to pay my meal, they said, your meal has already been paid for. So I'm assuming that because someone realized that I was a veteran, they wanted to show their appreciation to me. One of the policemen that was sitting behind me. I don't know which one it was, because they said they didn't want to disclose themselves, who they were. So appreciation. We have to do that for others. Show our appreciation to our veterans. Say it, not just speak it, but put it to action.
Those Chaplain Allen, those are just those acts of kindness, right? In this particular case, showing that act of kindness or just trying to, do a nice gesture for a veteran. But I think if we can do that in all aspects of our lives, now I'm going to go a little more unicorn and rainbows and we're all going to sing Kumbaya. But I think, if we all were able to just, exert more acts of kindness, not just with our veterans, just with people, on a day-to-day, I think, we do then change, because you said, Derek, you said for that one veteran, if you think that one, maybe Vietnam veteran for service, that can make his day, right? And one of you guys mentioned that, people remember how you made them feel. It's that Maya Angelou quote, and one of you guys said, people don't always remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. And so sometimes it's just an act of kindness, as simple as, saying, hey, are you okay? Checking on someone, or just, hey, how you doing this morning? And just things like that are just simple acts of kindness can change someone's day, because that person's been having a crappy day all day, and I think Jeremy used that example, that you're just going through the day and why do I want to be that one, maybe inadvertently, but why would I want to be that person who maybe then triggering because I say something nasty to him, or kind of maybe more of a jerk, versus just not only is it better nothing else, but just being kind. Like, hey, how you doing? Like, just kind of like, just, it's, something kind, an act of kindness that all of a sudden deflates me and goes like, dude, my day is not that bad. It's okay. And definitely, I think for our veterans, that's a great tip, I think, that you guys put, when we can do an act of kindness. And it could be as simple as just acknowledging someone's service, those of us that have been fortunate to not have to, well, obviously we could all volunteer, right? So that's why I tell people, it's just like, well, if you want to, you could, but we chose not to, maybe, or there was maybe at the time we didn't feel there was a need for our service at that time, but understanding that there wasn't that need and you didn't have to pick up the mantle and carry because somebody else was doing it for you in your place. So when I came out of high school, and the fact that I didn't have to go serve, and the country was at peace and et cetera, those things was because, you know what, there was a Derek, there was a Chaplain, and there was a Jeremy who had already stepped into that role and said, you know, I got this. You go do it, go about your business, right? You know, it's like you guys, whether people think about it or not, and our veterans, whether people think about it or not, have been able to step up and you know, fill that gap and stand on that wall and do that job that allows the rest of us to go like, you know what, I'm gonna just keep going about my day and I'm just gonna keep going about my life. And remember that you're able to do that and we're able to have that luxury because of the men and women that said, you know what, I'll go ahead and take watch and I'm gonna go ahead and stand over here. You go ahead and go about your day. You go ahead and go about your school. You go ahead about having your family, doing those things. And really, I think we can't forget that we've all been able to do that because of the thousands of people who've really stepped into those roles like you guys have. So acts of kindness, I think, are really important. Acts of kindness with our veterans, you know, that you guys just said right now are really valuable. There's a question that we had for you guys, and so I want to make sure we get to a couple of these because you guys have had really great insights. And I think, Jimmy, you may have even touched on that a little bit, which is, you know, we have to remember that our veterans come from different communities. They come from different families, different backgrounds, different cultures. And just how do you guys think that, or should, you know, the provider, the professional that's working with veterans also remember that, you know, our veterans are people like anyone else, and they're made up of all these other experiences. So it's not just a veteran, although that particular experience of service forms its own specific brotherhood, right? And it develops its own culture. But that people also come from different backgrounds before they ever got into the service. And so are those things that providers should be thinking about? Should that be based on an individual basis? What are your guys' thoughts on that? Does my question make sense, what I'm asking? Okay.
I guess I'll just go first real quick. I would say it does make a difference, you know, to understand where they're coming from. A lot of people that join the military or in my infantry units were from troubled families. They were trying to release and get out of where they were because they weren't going to go nowhere. So they probably do come with trauma before, and they probably do. And it, you know, I didn't realize it from me growing up, but when I had that, you know, Dr. Nelson pointed it out. Oh, okay, so you already had trauma already before. And I'm like, what? I wouldn't say that is. He goes, no. That kickstarts the trauma. And I'm sure these the licensed people here can touch on that as well. I mean, you know, you go through things in life when you're younger and you wouldn't think it's trauma, but it's definitely carried over. And until you address the main source or beginning of the trauma, you're never going to really fully get there.
And that was spot on, Jeremy. Honestly, I mean, you said it well. I mean, it's hard to follow that act. Honestly, you do have to deal with the core issues. You know, trauma is just exacerbated a lot of times. You know, these pre-war traumas are issues that, you know, affect us, and, you know, those things have to be addressed because it's like we repress those emotions, repress those feelings. And, you know, I try to explain things in a very simple way in terms of, like, let's just say depression, for example. Before depression becomes depression, it's unmanaged sadness, right? It's just sadness over time that has not been managed. And the same thing with post-traumatic stress disorder. It's like this idea of like this anxiety and stress and tension that has not been managed because, you know, suck it up and drive on, get back on the battlefield, get back on the, you know, get back out there, you know, that type of thing, and just constantly going, not slowing down. And so when we're able to slow ourselves down and like reconnect and, you know, those thoughts come in, I think it's extremely important, man, to really deal with the core issues. But what if your culture, you know, said that those things weren't a problem? What if that was normal in your culture? And then once you realize that it was not normal, now you have to reconcile within yourself that, you know, this person who may have either, you know, caused some type of physical, emotional, or maybe even sexual abuse for some of us, that person who loved me wasn't supposed to do that, or wasn't supposed to talk to me like that, especially the subtle ones like emotional abuse. A lot of times we overlook things like emotional abuse, and we just focus on sexual abuse and things like that. But emotional abuse and psychological abuse is just as traumatic for an individual. So absolutely, I think just dealing with those core issues is extremely important.
I think you and I talked about this a while back. So, and I think it kind of relates here of understanding. And I think Jeremy said, said the point of, some individuals that maybe have already experienced a lot of adverse childhood experiences, and they've experienced, a toxic childhood, and you've got all of those. And then how can that be then, compounded by, maybe a service-related experience and trauma? And I think we were discussing of sometimes the confusion for the person may be like, where did the trauma start, or which one do I start with, right? Because it's just like, if you just have so much of it in your life, unfortunately, people do experience a lot of, adverse childhood experiences and traumatic experiences, to where by the time they get out of the service, it's just like, I don't know which came first, dude. I don't know which one is worse. I don't like, hey, let's talk about your issues. I don't, which one do I tackle? So coming from a clinical standpoint, what would you be, or what do you think about that? And how would you maybe advise or recommend, for those on this side that may be working with a veteran and understanding, like, they could have had trauma beforehand, they could have had trauma service related, and they could have just had so much to where they couldn't even tell you where to start. So how do you help them start on, like?
Sure. Well, that's a good question. And that really is going to depend on, where the veteran is in their sort of recovery process. So now, if they're not able to piece together any information and have little to no insight, then you definitely want to use a bottom-up approach, which is a lot of like the mindfulness activities, just allowing them to really just, first of all, get in control of their breathing, understanding where the source of the first of all, the tension in their body is, and then in that space, allow for that tension to speak to them. It's a very powerful exercise that I used to use when I worked direct service, where I would have an individual close their eyes, and it's sort of like an in vivo exposure, where you have to sort of relive that experience, or relive a experience. Sometimes you have to start at the very sort of low level thing, like you went to, like if a individual veteran told you they got into an altercation at a bar, well, let's talk about that. But as you talk about that, close your eyes. Like, tell me what the first thing that comes up on the inside of you when you close your eyes. It's a powerful thing when you have someone close their eyes, because you're shutting off one of the senses. And I think the eyes distract you a lot of time. And going back to what I was saying earlier, that, the senses are where that limbic system is going to be triggered. So if you close the eyes, then that's one less thing that's going to cause that's going to trigger that hypervigilance. And so being able to just, with the bottom up approach with that person, just really trying to help them get grounded and be okay with even feeling that very real emotion. Because Jeremy stated it earlier, sometimes, we'll dart out of an office because we felt something on the inside. Now, there's other individuals who, they know how to manage that emotion. They know how to breathe. They know how to control that. Then with them, you're going to use a top-down approach. You're going to use, CBT or one of those, insight-oriented therapy to help them piece together their story through a narrative, right? And try to connect the dots, and really understand, like, okay, it literally is like connecting the dots. Like, okay, when is the first time I remember feeling like this? So that real emotion that person felt, helping them identify, man, the first time that's happened. And you'll be surprised. Like, I've worked with veterans before, and veterans have been able to, if they develop a strong rapport with you, they can tell you that when I was 4 years old, I felt that same strong feeling on the inside of me. And they can literally recall the story. And it is amazing to see someone do that. And you tell yourself, like, wow, this person is in their 50s and they just recalled a story from 4 years old. And sometimes it depends on the person. It's not always the specific details, like all of the details, but some people are like dead on with the detail. And you just imagine that inner turmoil that's going on because of all of those memories and not having a space to process it. Right. And so, I think you really have to assess. It's an individual type basis. It's not a one size fits all approach. You really just, when you work with the person, you really figure out kind of where they are, and you'll know when you're working with a veteran, whether or not they sort of have that ability to regulate their emotions. I mean, that's the first thing we want to look at. Like, can they regulate their emotions? And you're in a few like interactions and engagements, you'll be able to really determine that. Especially if they trust you, they're going to get comfortable and they're going to let it fly. I promise you.
I'll say something real quick before Chaplain here closes it out. I just would say that I was a very difficult veteran to work with, right? I was the guy that you didn't want to be working with. So I would just say what did it for me, because I wouldn't talk about anything. I would just, he would just bring up, what's going on, what happened this week? Maybe can you think of something today? And it just started from there, maybe I recalled something from the week. He's like, okay, yeah, just like Derek said, let's talk about that, and then building that rapport. It probably took me about a whole year to finally bring up certain situations. For sure, protecting myself, my defense was up. I just didn't like talking. I wouldn't even talk to anybody. So doing this is kind of amazing, just to see for myself that I'm able to sit here and be honest and open. But yeah, something as similar as that. A lot of doctors try different things. I just, again, the veteran must be open to it. The veteran must be willing to communicate at some point. If he's not, then just talk about normal things. Talk about football. Talk about anything to just get the veteran talking. And eventually, like Derek said, the veteran will open up and he will start sharing things when he's ready. So don't be discouraged that you're doing something wrong. It's a lot on the person.
And you have to be, just to add on to what you all have said, you have to be fluid and flexible because every veteran is different. We cannot have a cookie cutter approach to helping a veteran. If we fall into that trap, we will become shameful in our practice. So we must figure out, okay, what is it that they need, that particular veteran that's sitting before me right now? I may have one model here, okay, I'm gonna use that next model for the next person, that may not work because everyone comes from a different culture, different background, different experiences. I've sat with people who have come to me in my office as a chaplain and people would tell me, okay, I'm experienced with this. I've grown up in gangs. I have burned bodies alive. What do you do with that, chaplain? How do you help that veteran to get through the trouble he's having? Or someone who's in a relationship says, I don't feel comfortable in this type of relationship. I want to move on. I want to separate myself. So everyone has different needs. And so we need to be flexible and fluid in how we're going to work and approach that person based on their culture. And I would say also in closing that when it comes to dealing with a person, you're going to deal with their military issues versus their personal. I would deal with the person first. Okay, I would deal with the person because they cannot faithfully do their job and wear that uniform if they're psychologically and emotionally all jacked up. Okay, we've got to deal with the man, the woman upstairs. Deal with their mental, their psychological state, well-being. That's deep-seated issues first, and then once we get that sailor, that soldier, the Marine, that airman, a coastie ready, and then now we're ready to put them back out in the fight.
That's a great point, Chaplain. And I wanted to, just to piggyback on that. It's that concept back in, I think it was the feminist movement that coined the term intersectionality. This idea that we're like complex human beings with like multiple roles. Like I'm not just a veteran. I'm also a father. I'm also a caregiver, like all of my different roles that I play. And even for, some of the individuals, especially some individuals that are like in the LGBTQ community as well, that's an identity or a role. And so being able to like reconcile and meet that person where they are in terms of their identity. And those identities are multiple. It's not just veteran. And, sometimes, you'll meet a veteran that won't identify with their veteran status. I found to where, I've ran into veterans before and they, served multiple tours and, were NCO and all these things and they didn't identify with their service. But then you have someone else who may identify with their service. It's just, So it's really figuring, and to your point, figuring out who this person is as a human being and who they identify as to connect with them.
Awesome.
We're going to start to wrap it up here. I don't know if we've got any other questions that have come in the chat, but some of the other questions we actually had, you guys have kind of answered with your responses, which is ideally what we hope, is just that the conversation becomes kind of this natural, organic discussion to where we end up hitting up on a lot of different contexts. So I wanted to ask you each one more question, if we can, that's more geared back towards the families. So we've talked about ways that we could try to establish trust and relationships and foster relationships with our veterans. Jeremy gave some examples of, the doctor that he had worked with and just some of the things that he gave as far as tips to other veterans. But I wanted to ask you guys, what are things that we could do then to also establish trust and or relationships with those family members, right? The family members of the veteran that we're serving. What are things that we could do to be an ally to that family? Because I think, well, I'm not going to say I think, I don't know. I'm going to say that we may presume that the family, is wanting to be supportive of that particular individual. And so they may sometimes view maybe us coming in and poking and prodding as hey, you're going to be disruptive, or you may be causing more problems. So what are things that, and I think Chaplain, you talked about it early on, but what are things that we could do in the same way that you guys talked about with veterans, but with the families, to really show that, hey, we're there to help. We're there to try to support them as well as their loved ones. So what are some things that might be quick tips for us?
In my experience, this is just personal experience and friend experience to veterans is to ensure that I always would allow my partner to go first. I would allow the monkey out of the cage, I guess you could say. Even though, there's times, of course, you're going to feel attacked. Anyone's going to at some point, right? Because we all have faults and we all do behaviors that are going to attack the other individual. But I think it's important to focus on the spouse, because the spouse is going to tell the truth, whether the veteran wants to accept it or not. Most of the time, I mean, let's say if it's a healthy and good relationship, the spouse is going to let it be known of what's really occurring on a day-to-day basis. And let's say, for example, you have a veteran that storms out of that, right? Oh, I feel attacked. This is crazy. This isn't about helping me. And then at that point, maybe you can have separate sessions with one with the spouse, one with the veteran. Until it's time to come together and the therapist or individual is able to kind of dissect to each other at the separate appointments of what's happening and what's going on. A lot of times what happens, though, is if the storming and things come out, is the veteran and the spouse will go home and just battle about that now. So it kind of creates some type of friction. But again, you got to understand your partner, if it's a hindrance or if it's an assistance. But I think it is important to definitely dive into the spouse and whoever is the caregiver to the veteran. I hope that made some sense.
Yeah, it makes sense, Jeremy. I think you're right. I think just making them a part of the conversation, again, it's going back to that idea of needs assessment. I think we always want to intervene first, right? Whenever we see something going on or a crisis happening, one of the things that I've always tried to ground myself in is not to become a part of the veteran or the family member's crisis. And because I can't really help and hear their true needs if I'm only there to, it's crisis. Now, albeit, yeah, there are sometimes where there's immediate interventions and things that need to happen. But if I'm not listening and I'm just trying to, get that person out the office quickly, then I might miss that real need. And I'm definitely may overlook, assessing the whole family and really understanding, like, what does the whole family need? not just the veteran. Because if I can, again, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, Ahmad, like if I can help the whole family and connect the whole family to resources, hopefully what will end up happening is that the system itself is going to maintain homeostasis, and the veteran will be less dependent on care, less dependent on other resources outside of the house home, because I truly believe that the family system is the strongest unit. And so when the family system is whole, then they will be less reliant on, community resources and things like that. And most veterans you talk to, they want that. They want to feel like they can, provide for their family and be there. Going back to what, Jeremy said earlier, is just that this concept of like, it's like pride. Like you want to be able to take care of your family. And so when I can get someone, assistance just to get them going, but then empower them to be able to do it by themselves, and really, help, be one cohesive unit, then it's almost like recreating that camaraderie in a lot of ways. Like, that's one of the things I know comes up so much. Is like, how do you recreate that camaraderie and that fellowship that you have in the military? And I think it starts with the family unit. And so the whole family unit just needs the support.
You took the word right out of my mouth. Support.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm just kind of just building off of Jeremy's the foundation he laid here for us. Support is important. Sponsorship. I think if the families knew where they can turn to for support, where they could turn to for sponsorship, for being able to pick up that number, pick up that telephone and dial that number for help in this area, for help in that area, I think that would take a lot of pressure off of our families, our spouses, and our children. One source is one number they can have at their fingertips that lends help to all the spouses and their family members when they're not just in one area, but in many areas. I need my house painted. I need my grass cut. Call that number, and they get the support they need. I think there needs to be more events, more programs. We have a lot of groups inside of Fresno. I know in Hanford here, where you have the Marines are meeting here. Another group is meeting here. But what about us coming all together with the spouses, with family, and having a family day, a picnic day? We have watermelon and fruit, and everyone get a chance to fellowship and to tell their sea stories, tell their war stories, and all come together in that way. They have a fresh pick, and they don't have to wait till September the 11th. But like you were saying earlier, Ahmed, it could just happen throughout the year, this coming summer. So I think those are some of the things we can do, putting the resources out there, giving the support, and providing sponsorship. We just had a person who was moving from one duty station to the other. I'm talking about active duty now. And that wife was stranded at the airport for 3 days because her flight was canceled over and over again. She was pulling her hair out. She had 2 small children. Where were we then? What could we have done to help that particular person? What resources we could have placed in her hands to help her so that she would not be bitter towards the military or towards the airlines, but she was more bitter towards them. But I think that we can look towards doing those kind of events and programs and have those resources available in their hands. I think would be very helpful.
Awesome. That's a great idea, Chaplain Allen. And my thing to Derek is, hey, start thinking about something like that and circle back to me, because that would be something the department would love to be able to support and sponsor and see what we can do. So yeah, start exploring it and definitely keep us in the loop, because we would love to be able to support something like that. See, and this was the thing I wanted to tell you guys. If we have just a natural, organic conversation like this, we'll go through the time and we won't even hit all the questions we have done. And at the same time, you guys came up with some great questions for each other. Within your with your questions, or responses to the questions, you guys covered other questions. So, but even looking down at this, I'm like, there's a ton more things that I would love to be able to discuss with you all. and have people understand and diving into it. And to your point again, Chaplain, supporting our veterans should not be one time a year, should be an ongoing discussion and dialogue. And so I definitely would want to work with my team and work with you all to try to do something again like this sometime soon, to dive into maybe some additional areas that we could speak of. I know we started talking about, things of just, person's childhood and upbringing, how it could impact, their experience and knowing that, that they could have traumas or moral injuries or challenges that impact them prior to that. Being able to discuss, again, you guys had touched on it, but I think, deeper dive into like, okay, so how do we talk with maybe the children in the family and help them really understand what's going on, and even, risks of substance use and some of the other things in there. So I feel you gentlemen, based on not just your experiences, but based upon the work that you've done, are definitely some subject matter experts, and can give us real life, I want to say, practical applications, not in any way dismissing, the theoretical part, but it's one thing that, hey, I read this in class versus, hearing your guys' real life perspectives on those things. So if that's something that you guys are all up for, I would love, like I said, to host something like this again, maybe in a few months, and keep the conversation going. And I think the more we can inform those of us that work with or support veterans and just kind of becoming more acquainted with the dynamics and just deeper understanding, it could do it. And like Jeremy said, it sometimes it might be a veteran provider that works well with you, and sometimes, for it to benefit someone, it may need to be someone who's not a veteran, is coming from a different what is the word I'm looking for? Just has a different perspective. But the more we know, I think the better and more effective we can be in supporting veterans and their families. So hopefully you guys will be open for that, and we can circle back. Obviously not right now. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. I'm not going to go, Chaplain Allen, can I get you confirmed? I'm not going to do that right now too, but I will have Lisa circle back with you guys, and we can coordinate something where time works with you all and something similar to this. And definitely maybe by then we'll have more of a solid plan for maybe like a Veterans Family Day type of discussion that the chaplain suggested. And maybe by the next time we meet, we can start plugging that event or something like that too. So I want to let you guys, any last words, any last comments you want to make as we start to wrap up. I'll start with Chaplain Allen, if you have anything you would like to close out with.
I just believe that I'm really thankful, first of all, to be on this panel here with Jeremy and Derek, and with you, sir, moderating, and with Lisa taking the lead as well. As I think about our veterans, what comes to mind is, as we talk to them from day to day about their experiences, about their journey, hear their war stories, are we probing them with questions that's putting a greater burden on their hearts, and their involvement with the war, with the war, or is it really facilitating and really causing them to be better individuals by letting them, or by asking them questions, by letting them talk about their war stories? I tend to believe that by allowing our veterans to be vulnerable and sharing as much as they're willing to share, I think it is certainly a conduit towards care and a conduit towards healing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jeremy, would you go next?
Yeah, first, I just want to start out by saying thank you so much for this opportunity to the veterans out there. Believe me, I was down and out by far more than you can ever know. I just want to let you guys know that there is hope. Don't give up, and keep searching, keep finding, keep working, keep grinding. And I'm proof that you can make it. So please, if you ever need any assistance, please find me with EDD over at Manchester. Just ask for Jeremy at Workforce, and they'll come get me if you guys need anything. Okay. Thank you very much.
Derek.
Again, Ahmad, thank you for having me. The panelists, you guys are awesome. It was a great discussion. I just want to remind folks that the term that or the statements that I've heard echoed today were really about, it's more than just a Veterans Day. When we respond to our veterans, some of us work for veterans 365 days a year. And, but at the same time, understanding that veterans are just one part of a person's identity, and they're connected to families. They're connected to children that are going to school. That child that's at school, may be bullying another kid, but it's probably because he's probably being bullied at home by his veteran dad or by his veteran uncle, and we don't know what's happening. And sometimes those are their narratives. And I think there's 6 degrees of separation. You'll be surprised on who you talk to. You may be talking to someone, they may be experiencing some trauma, and it may be related to something that kicked off from a veteran. Like, I even looked at my own life, and I'm like studying, I have this thing where I'm like doing a psychosocial assessment on myself, right? And I look at my own life and I'm like, wow, my grandfather was a veteran, and just looking at his life and just choices and decisions that he's made. And I asked myself, like, obviously there's other risk factors and other traumas and things that happen in his life, but how drastically his life changed after getting out of the military and coming back home. I mean, my grandfather served in World War II and the Korean War. And so it's just amazing to kind of look at that, how it sort of skipped a whole generation and no one else served. And then here it is, I decided to serve. And, I just want people to be mindful of, like, like if you're a teacher, or you're working in a school, or you're working with children, are you working with a coworker? You don't know if they're dealing with a veteran at home who may be having issues, and again, they may need to get connected, and maybe them getting connected might help the veteran have some hope to get connected as well. I think it's dynamic when you talk about a family system. When you start to see, your partner working hard and overcoming things, it's encouraging sometimes to, in a healthy relationship, that, maybe I can do that too. Sometimes any one of us can get down on ourselves and get discouraged. And so seeing that happen with someone you love and care about can be a very, motivating factor to kick back in that discipline that we all know and have learned to know. And so, again, I just thank you for this platform, this opportunity to speak about, veterans and maybe in their families.
Absolutely. And I want to remind everyone out there that's listening, we know we're trying to have candid, honest conversations, but we're also really wanting to make sure that we're doing what we can to lift up and support our veterans and their families. So want to again emphasize that we're not saying that there's things wrong with them. We're merely discussing things that have probably occurred that have impacted our veterans, and we're really just trying to think of ways of how we can really support them through that, to what Derek was talking about, and we can have a whole different conversation. I think Jeremy put in here, he could go to midnight with this conversation. And then I've got questions for you guys that we could go into midnight of, like, just understanding, what is a family experience when a family member is deployed, and how does that impact, a child, and how does that impact, like, how does that give you as a little kid, like, angst and trouble sleeping and things like that, because you're wondering, is dad okay, is mom okay, things like that. So there's just so many dynamics to that, and that's why I'm really happy that you guys are willing for us to do this again, and we can keep having a deeper dive into this. And like I said, it's not one time a year, but throughout the year we want to have this conversation. So before we wrap up, I do want to thank Derek for your time today, also for your service and that of your families. Same for you, Jeremy. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your service, and thank your family for all of their support. And Chaplain Allen, same thing for you. Thank you for your continued work and service. Thank you for your time today, and also thank you for your family, because I understand, and you guys have stressed here, that the family is equally involved in the work, and so I do want to extend a thanks and gratitude to them as well. And Lisa will be in touch with you guys. We'll try to set up another one of these soon. Keep the conversation going. We'll post this information will remain on our social media. If people have got questions after this, you watch it, a couple of days later, and you've got a question posted in there, we'll do our best to try to respond or connect you to one of the resources that you may be heard on here today. Otherwise, thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Have a great evening. Be safe. We'll talk to you all soon.